The moors of North Yorkshire stretched endlessly beneath the dawn, painted in ghostly gray by a stubborn fog that clung to every heather and gorse bush. A battered Land Rover from the National Trust jolted down a barely there track, tires slipping on wet grass, headlights stabbing into the drifting mist. Inside, Lady Amelia Hawthorne gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles pale. The engine's steady growl was the only steady thing in a world made of shifting shapes, whispering winds, and the silent, unseen presence of something wild. Amelia's eyes scanned the fields, trained by years of both privilege and purpose. She'd grown up on these lands as a Hawthorne, daughter of the Earl, but she'd spent her last 4 years earning muddy boots and real respect among rangers, not debutantes. Today, she wasn't here as a lady. She was a wildlife ranger, called in before sunrise to respond to a report. A black stallion, loose, dangerous, likely injured, and somewhere out here, a foal separated from its herd. The radio crackled, a clipped voice. Davies, her boss, barked the usual reminders about protocols, risk management, the law. She thumbed the volume down. Out here, rules faded. Out here, instinct reigned. A shape flickered at the edge of vision, a flash of movement so quick it might have been a trick of the light. Amelia eased the Land Rover to a halt, heart thumping. The cold bit through her jacket as she stepped out, binoculars in one hand, tranquilizer rifle slung over her shoulder. Her breath came in white puffs, instantly stolen by the North Sea wind that swept across the moor, a distant whinny, sharp, thin, desperate. Amelia's boots squelched in peat as she moved quickly toward the sound, weaving between clumps of heather. The fog muffled everything, every footstep, every snap of a twig. Another whinny, closer now, high-pitched, unmistakably young. She froze. Through a gap in the mist, a small figure emerged, a foal, no more than a few months old, coat smeared with mud, eyes wild with terror. Its legs trembled as it pawed at the ground, nostrils flaring, searching for its mother. Then, chaos. A thunder of barking ripped the calm, sudden and violent. Shapes barreled out of the fog. 6, maybe 8 hounds, lean and rangy, their collars jingling as they closed in on the foal. Their eyes gleamed, tongues lolling, bodies coiled for the chase. Somewhere, a hunter's whistle pierced the dawn, too far to call them off. Amelia's muscles tensed. She raised the tranquilizer rifle, finger hovering on the trigger, mind racing. Dogs weren't supposed to be loose here, not this early, not on National Trust land. The foal screamed, a shrill, shattering sound. Hounds surged forward, teeth bared, surrounding it. Before she could move, a dark force broke the mist, a stallion, massive, jet black, his mane flying like a battle flag. Midnight Regent, the legend. He hit the pack with the full fury of muscle and hooves, scattering hounds like autumn leaves. His scream split the morning. The foal darted behind him, clumsy but trusting, pressed against the safety of that sleek black flank. A hound lunged, Regent spun, lashed out, missed by inches. The dog yelped, retreated, regrouped with the others. Amelia's hands shook. She forced herself to breathe, to stay low, hidden behind a tumble of rocks. The air crackled with fear, aggression, survival. Regent didn't back down. He lowered his head, ears pinned, daring the dogs to try again. For a moment, they did. One snapped at his tail, another tried to circle to the foal. Regent charged, hooves pounding, the ground vibrating with his rage. 2 dogs peeled away, retreating into the fog, tails tucked. The rest wavered, torn between instinct and terror. A gunshot, muffled, distant, not aimed at anything, just a warning, but it sent the pack scattering for good. Silence crashed down, heavy as thunder. Regent's chest heaved, sides lathered with sweat despite the cold. The foal pressed closer, seeking comfort, the bond immediate and raw. Amelia watched, unmoving, heart in her throat. Everything she'd been taught, her duty, the rules, told her to trank the stallion now, get him out before anyone got hurt. But something deeper, older, kept her finger off the trigger. She watched as Regent nuzzled the foal, blowing warm air into its tangled mane, reassuring it with a gentleness that seemed to contradict his violence. Somewhere nearby, a Land Rover engine revved. Davies, hunting for signals, impatient to capture and contain. Amelia pressed herself lower, barely daring to breathe. A mistake now would mean disaster for all three: stallion, foal, ranger. She let herself memorize the scene, the fog thinning just enough for sunlight to strike Regent's coat, turning black to blue to silver in a single breath. The foal, Colby, shaky but unbroken, trust and terror swirling in its dark eyes. Amelia caught between laws written on paper and the wild, unwritten law of the land itself. The mist thickened again, swallowing horses, hounds, and humans alike. The only evidence anything had happened was a trail of hoof prints, a tuft of black hair caught on the heather, and the echo of a stallion's defiance lingering in the chill air. Back at her Land Rover, Amelia wiped cold sweat from her brow, heart still hammering. The day was just beginning, but already the world had changed. Out here, in the vastness of the moor, where dawn meant danger and every law was tested by survival, she had seen the truth in action. She would have to choose sides. She would have to decide who she was: Hawthorne or Ranger, bystander or protector. And as the sun finally rose, blood red over the wild English hills, she knew that whatever happened next, she could not look away. The morning pressed on with a fierce, unrelenting wind, carrying the scent of rain and earth across the open moor. Lady Amelia Hawthorne sat in her Land Rover, boots muddy, jacket zipped tight, hands trembling slightly, as she reloaded the tranquilizer rifle. The radio next to her sputtered with static. Then Davies's voice, sharp and impatient, cut through. "Regent's GPS tracker pinged near Hairstone Ridge, Amelia. Don't lose him. Tranquilize and wait for backup. No lone heroics today." She let the message end without reply, lowering the volume until the only sound left was the moaning wind and her own breathing. She thought of the foal's terrified eyes, the stallion's desperate courage, the chaos of hounds breaking against Midnight Regent like a living tide. She wiped her palms on her jeans, the cold cutting through even the thick fabric. Leaving the Land Rover behind, Amelia shouldered her pack and the rifle, picking her way up the stony path that wound through heather and gorse. The moor was waking now. Blackbirds chattered. Distant sheep bleated, the sky above shifting from pewter to a sullen blue. Every footstep felt heavier, more loaded with consequence. She moved quietly, learning long ago that the land spoke only to those who listened. Tracks told stories. Here, a wide, fresh print, Regent's, smaller, frantic indentations, Colby's. Here and there, muddy paw prints, hounds banished but not forgotten. She followed the trail, each print a silent testament to what had happened and what still might. As she crested a low ridge, the world seemed to shrink. Heather gave way to a small, secluded hollow where sunlight lanced through the fog in trembling columns. There, on the edge of a shallow pond, Regent stood guard, head held high, nostrils flaring as he watched over Colby, who grazed nervously on tufts of wet grass. Regent's coat, still gleaming from sweat and adrenaline, caught the light with a midnight shimmer. Amelia crouched behind a tumble of stones, steadying her breathing, lifting the rifle, eyes finding the stallion's massive form in her sights. She'd made this kind of shot before, a quick, painless dart, a drowsy collapse, containment, safety. Her finger found the trigger, the metal cold and sure. She exhaled, lined up, let the world go quiet. But Regent lifted his head, ears flicking. His dark eyes met hers through the brush, and for an endless moment nothing else existed, just the wild defiance in his gaze, the unwavering protection he offered to a foal that wasn't even his own. Colby pressed close, trembling, trusting, as Regent nuzzled him, rumbling something reassuring in the silent language of horses. Amelia's heart thudded against her ribs. She hesitated. Regent could have bolted. He was faster, stronger, free. But he stayed, always putting himself between Colby and danger, his every movement guided by some code she only half understood. It was a lesson in loyalty, in wildness, in doing the right thing even when no one's watching. The rifle felt heavier with each heartbeat. A buzz from her phone, another message from Davies, the letters harsh and insistent. "Whatever it takes, Amelia. By sundown, that's an order." She lowered the rifle, breath catching. The world spun with 100 consequences. Her job, her reputation, the rules that built the fences she'd always lived behind. But out here, in the wind and mist, Those rules felt thin as paper. She tucked the rifle away, swapped it for her field journal, and began to write, crouched low, observing rather than intervening. Regent and Colby moved as a unit. Regent nudged the foal away from deep mud, showed him how to pick safer footing, flicked his ears at the scent of fox on the breeze. Amelia's pen moved quickly, sketching diagrams, jotting notes about herd behavior, maternal instincts in a stallion, the subtle dance between guardian and ward. Time drifted. Amelia watched the moor come alive in their movements, the way Regent would freeze, ears swiveling at every distant bark, every creak of the wind through the grass. Colby, still frightened but learning with every step, began to mimic the stallion's poise. Amelia felt herself caught up in their fragile world, her own breathing matching the rhythm of their hooves. Suddenly, the distant crackle of tires on gravel broke the spell. Another Land Rover, far off, but closing in, its white paint catching in the sunlight. Panic surged in Amelia's chest. If Davies or the other rangers found them, it would all be over. Traps, sedation, captivity. She scribbled a warning in the dirt, a makeshift sign. Caution, fragile herd, observing, do not disturb. She retreated, using her phone to zoom in and capture photos. Regent standing tall, Colby pressed to his side, a portrait of wild defiance against the coming storm of bureaucracy and law. Amelia's mind spun with the impossible choice: follow orders or trust her own instincts. The Land Rover drew nearer, engine grumbling, a beacon of authority and expectation. Amelia slid into the brush, barely daring to breathe, watching as the shadow of law crept closer to the wildness she'd just witnessed. Regent tensed, muscles rippling, but didn't flee. Colby followed his lead, fear yielding to something braver, something learned in the crucible of survival. Davies emerged from the vehicle, his figure framed against the rising sun. He scanned the moor, radio in hand, boots crunching on gravel. He shouted her name, voice echoing across the hills. Amelia pressed herself deeper into the undergrowth, the weight of her decision anchoring her in place. She knew now, with a clarity born of risk and wonder, that she couldn't be both enforcer and protector. Her loyalty wasn't to rules or reputation. Not here, not now. It was to the moment, to the silent agreement between wild things and those rare people willing to watch without controlling. The wind shifted, carrying away Davies's calls, burying them in the heather. Amelia waited until he left, then rose from her hiding place, heart pounding with equal parts fear and exhilaration. She trailed Regent and Colby at a distance, notebook in hand, witness to a story that was bigger than her own name, her own future. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the moor in molten gold, Amelia made a silent vow. She would not betray this trust, not today, not ever. The days that followed drifted across the North Yorkshire moors, slow and dreamlike, as if the land itself were pausing to catch its breath after the violence of the dawn. The wind softened, no longer sharp and biting, but carrying a gentle, rolling chill through waves of purple heather. For Lady Amelia Hawthorne, time seemed to move differently here, each hour stretching, expanding, opening to the secret rhythms of wild things. Amelia's world narrowed to the rise and fall of the hills, the endless quilt of wildflowers, and the silent passage of two horses, a stallion and a foal, across the vast, dew-soaked expanse. The moorland had a way of swallowing sound, turning even the most frantic movements into whispers. Amelia made her camp in the shelter of an ancient hawthorn, her days measured by observation, her nights by restless dreams. Every morning she rose before dawn, shaking off the sleep that clung to her in the chill. She recorded everything: hoofprints in the soft earth, the scattering of droppings, the half-moon marks left by Colby's tentative steps. She followed the horses at a respectful distance, never intruding, never disturbing their fragile peace. Binoculars pressed to her eyes, she watched the black stallion lead the foal through a world both beautiful and perilous. Regent became more than a legend. He was a teacher, a guardian, his movements deliberate, almost patient. He showed Colby how to find the sweetest grass near the stream bank, how to listen for the warning notes in a skylark's call, how to test the mud at the water's edge before drinking. Amelia marveled at the way the stallion nudged the foal away from a patch of bog, at the way Colby's ears pricked forward, trying to understand. Rain came and went, soaking the hills, turning the heather into a sea of trembling color. Amelia's notebook filled with sketches and notes, each page a record of wild education. The foal's thin legs grew steadier. His coat shone a little brighter with every sunrise. Regent, for all his wariness, never truly relaxed. His head was always high, his body a barrier between the colt and the hidden threats that lingered at the edge of the moor. Once, a shadow crossed the sky, a buzzard circling, searching for something small and weak. Regent watched the bird with narrowed eyes, never moving, but Colby huddled close, flanks pressed to the stallion's side. Amelia held her breath until the raptor drifted away, its shadow slipping from the hillside. Even in the peace, the tension hummed beneath the surface. The moor was alive with unseen dangers, a tangle of brambles that could cut to the bone, a sink of waterlogged peat that swallowed anything that lingered too long, the distant echo of dogs barking far away on the wind. Amelia checked her phone at intervals, seeing missed calls and terse messages from Davies piling up, each one a reminder that her time was borrowed. She silenced the device, letting the world of rules and orders fade behind the curtain of mist. In the afternoons, sunlight painted the land gold. Amelia watched Regent stand knee-deep in thistles while Colby napped nearby, head twitching with dreams. Sometimes the stallion would lift his head, eyes turning in Amelia's direction, as if aware of her watching. She froze, hardly daring to breathe. Then, satisfied, Regent would lower his head and graze once more. Her own hunger became a background ache. Canned beans, oatcakes, cold tea, barely enough to keep her moving, but it felt right, somehow, to pare life down to its simplest needs. In the evenings, she wrote by flashlight, describing Regent's careful guidance, the foal's faltering progress, the delicate balance of freedom and protection. She remembered the world outside the moor only in fragments. Her mother's letters, polite but urgent, asking when she would come home for tea, for council meetings, for the endless responsibilities that came with her title. Amelia read them by the flickering glow of her phone screen, her fingers hesitating over each reply. What could she say? That she had found something more real, more honest, out here than she ever had in the marble halls of Hawthorne Estate. On the third morning, a heavy fog rolled in, so thick she could barely see her hand in front of her face. She moved quietly through the swirling gray, her boots muffled in the wet grass. Somewhere ahead, she heard the soft splash of water, the horses crossing the shallow stream, Regent leading, Colby trailing, their bodies ghost-like in the mist. Amelia slipped on the muddy bank, nearly tumbling into the water herself. Her heart hammered as she righted herself, cursing under her breath. The horses paused, heads raised, nostrils flaring, as if listening for danger. Then Regent snorted, tossing his head, and Colby leaped after him, the two silhouettes vanishing into the broom. She followed slowly, careful not to spook them, feeling both frustration and admiration at their alertness. The fog made every step uncertain, every sound a possible threat. Yet Regent navigated the moor with unerring confidence, the foal learning by mimicry, by proximity, by the unwavering presence of the stallion's shadow. That afternoon, the mist finally broke, revealing a world cleansed and sparkling. Amelia found herself atop a gentle hill, the sky above impossibly blue, the fields below painted in a riot of color, heather, gorse, wild thyme. Regent and Colby grazed in the sunlight, two dark figures in a tapestry of purple and gold. Amelia sat cross-legged in the grass, notebook open, pen moving in time with her heartbeat. She wrote of resilience, of adaptation, of the silent pact between the living and the wild. The moor, in its quiet, demanded humility, demanded observation, demanded patience. A distant echo. Was that the growl of a vehicle? Or just the wind shifting over stone? Amelia's pulse quickened. She closed her notebook, stowing it safely away, eyes on the horses. For now, the peace held. But the world outside, with its rules and dangers, was always closer than it seemed. As dusk fell, a chill crept over the land. the air tinged with the promise of another restless night. Amelia wrapped herself tighter in her jacket, watching Regent and Colby settle beneath the hawthorn, two shapes pressed close, bound by necessity and trust. She listened to the wind, to the soft nickers of the foal, to the stallion's steady breathing. On the moor, survival was an act of learning, of teaching, of holding fast even when the world conspired to separate. Amelia, alone but not lonely, watched and waited, her heart anchored to the wild, the untamed, the enduring. The moor gave way to civilization in sudden, jarring stages. Fields rolled into stone fences, wild heather softened into clipped lawns, and the relentless sky grew hemmed in by old brick and glass. Lady Amelia Hawthorne crossed the threshold of Hawthorne Manor in boots caked with peat, hair tousled by the moor's wind, face still carrying the memory of wide, empty horizons. The entryway was quiet, but for the gentle ticking of the long case clock and the muffled clatter of silverware somewhere deeper inside, she set her gear by the door, wiping her hands on her trousers, eyes drifting to the grand mirror above the mantel. There she was, a Hawthorne by birth, but changed by days spent living at the edge of wildness. In the glass, she saw traces of her father's stern brow, her mother's steady gaze, and beneath it all, the stubborn will that had always set her apart from polite society. The house smelled of fresh baking and polished wood. She followed the scent down the hall, footsteps echoing against the marble, and paused before the drawing room where voices mingled with the clink of china. The door was open, just enough to see the long table set with scones, marmalade, mint leaves, and the delicate blue teapot her mother favored. Sunlight spilled through the bay windows, painting everything in soft gold. Countess Hawthorne presided at the table, a portrait of composure in a world of ritual. She looked up as Amelia entered, expression flickering with something like relief, then something sharper, harder to name. Other guests murmured polite greetings, a local judge, two distant cousins. Amelia gave a small nod, found her place, let herself slip into the familiar choreography of afternoon tea. Cups were poured, scones broken, marmalade spooned onto delicate porcelain. Conversation ebbed and flowed around the table. Weather, politics, the state of the roses in the East Garden. Amelia listened, hands wrapped around her cup, the heat sinking into her chilled skin. She felt both present and distant, like a ghost come in from the moor. It wasn't long before the conversation sharpened, pivoting toward the wild, restless land just beyond their boundaries. The judge mentioned the increasing problems with loose horses, stallions spooking livestock, a foal seen near the ridge, tales spreading among the tenant farmers. He spoke of regulations, of safety, of the delicate balance between tradition and progress. Countess Hawthorne's gaze rested on her daughter. "The National Trust is under scrutiny this season," she said, voice light but edged with intent. "We hear talk of certain rangers making unorthodox decisions. There are concerns, Amelia, about discipline, about reputation." Amelia sipped her tea, choosing her silence with care. The words pressed in on her like a collar: duty, expectation, the centuries-old burden of a family name. Yet the moor still clung to her, wild and stubborn, resisting containment. Outside, a gardener clipped roses. A dog barked in the distance. Inside, the air thickened with the slow, inevitable turning of conversation. One of the cousins, older and sharp-eyed, leaned in, lowering his voice. "Have you heard of the Foxhall Syndicate? The papers have started to mention them again. Something about illegal trail hunts near Wycliffe Land. They say they're after that black stallion, the one with the racing blood." A tension crept up Amelia's spine, cold and coiled. She thought of Midnight Regent, his power and his pride, his absolute refusal to submit. She imagined him running, free, untamed, the embodiment of everything the syndicate coveted. Her hand tightened around her cup. Countess Hawthorne caught the gesture, her gaze narrowing. "Felix Crow is a dangerous man, Amelia. I hope you understand the sort of people who gather around him. This is no longer a matter for the hunt club and afternoon gossip. There's money at stake now, real money. And the law, for all its bluster, has a way of looking the other way when the right palms are greased." Scones were passed. The judge spoke of enforcement, of needing to set examples. Someone joked about old tales of poachers and gamekeepers, but the laughter was brittle. The shadows outside grew longer as the sun dipped behind the oaks. Amelia drifted in and out of the conversation, her thoughts circling the moor, the horses, the dangers that grew with every rumor. Her phone vibrated, unseen beneath the table, a message from Davies, terse and impatient. Update. Any sign of Regent? She ignored it, focusing instead on the coded language of the table. Here, everything was politics, even family. The Countess reminded her, in a quiet aside, that the Hawthorne name meant something worth protecting. Amelia nodded, outwardly compliant, inwardly burning. By the end of the meal, the warnings were clear. The syndicate was moving soon, maybe days, maybe hours. The hunt would not be for sport, but for profit, for reputation, for the spectacle of power played out in blood and dust on the moor. Regent and Colby, once symbols of wildness, were now targets. The law, always just a step behind, could be bent or broken. Night fell as Amelia slipped away, heart pounding. She returned to her room, peeling off the mask of composure, letting the wildness back in. Out her window, the moor lay in darkness, wind whispering against glass, carrying secrets. She packed a rucksack with silent urgency. First aid kit, maps, her notebook full of sketches, protein bars, spare batteries, a coil of rope. Each item dropped in with a determination that stiffened her spine. She shed the trappings of Lady Hawthorne, pulling on her ranger's jacket, the battered boots, the gear that had become more her armor than any silk or pearl. In the hall, she paused by an old painting, her ancestors, proud and unsmiling, eyes fixed forever on a world that changed too slowly. She wondered what they would think of her now, caught between law and loyalty, family and freedom. Amelia stepped out into the night, breath steaming in the cold. The air smelled of damp earth, of grass, and the faintest trace of danger. Above, the stars flickered, distant and untouchable. She set her course for the moor, for Regent and Colby, for the fragile hope that courage might matter more than tradition. With every step, she felt the tension coil tighter, her world shrinking to a single purpose. The syndicate was coming. The storm was building, and somewhere beyond the hedgerows, beneath the endless, sheltering sky, wild things waited, hoping, trusting, enduring, as they always had. Night pressed down on the North Yorkshire moor, smothering the world in darkness, the air thick with the promise of rain. Amelia moved swiftly and low, her breath steaming in the chill, boots sloshing through shallow puddles. Headlamp dimmed, she threaded a careful path across uneven ground, each step measured, every sense on edge. Somewhere, out there, unseen but felt, trouble moved as surely as the wind. She could taste it, metallic and urgent, beneath the scent of damp heather and boggy earth. Earlier, in the thinning daylight, she'd seen Davies's Land Rover parked off the track, engine still warm. The hood gleamed under her fingers. She pressed a hand to the metal, still radiating heat. He was nearby. The National Trust radio she carried picked up static, then his voice, short, tense, his words clipped as he relayed coordinates and codes back to headquarters. Positive signal, deploying now, requesting backup at grid 4. Amelia crouched in the shadow of a gnarled birch, listening, every muscle taut. In her mind, she replayed the warnings from T, the syndicate, their illegal hunts, Davies's obsession with capturing Regent. Every thread pulled tighter around her, binding duty and defiance together. She pushed deeper into the moor, flashlight off, trusting memory and instinct. A sudden noise, a metallic snap, faint but unmistakable. Her heart jolted. She crept forward, the wind whipping her hair across her eyes. There, tangled in the low brush, was a snare. A cruel loop of steel cable, its end staked deep in the ground. Another 10 feet on, another, this one half hidden by flattened grass, baited with a chunk of carrot. The realization hit hard. Davies wasn't just tracking, he was trapping. A wave of anger rose, hot and cold. She knelt, gloved hands working quickly, carefully disabling the first snare, tucking the cable into her pack. Her hands shook, not from cold but from fury and fear. A ranger's job was to protect, not to wound. A sudden shriek shattered the hush, high and raw, echoing across the hills. The sound yanked her to her feet, heart pounding. Another shriek. Then the panicked, ragged whinny of a horse. Colby. She ran, thorns tearing at her jacket, breath burning in her chest. The ground sloped away, boggy, treacherous, sucking at her boots. She followed the sound, half sliding, half falling, until she broke into a clearing where moonlight pierced the clouds. There, Colby flailing in terror, back leg caught fast in a snare, eyes wild, sides heaving. Regent circled the foal, head low, ears pinned, voice thundering in furious challenge. Blood streaked the foal's fetlock, shining wet in the pale light. Amelia dropped to her knees at Colby's side, hands already working the buckle of the snare. Regent's body was a shield, hooves churning the mud as he spun at every imagined threat. Colby's breaths came in ragged gasps. "Easy, easy." The words slipped out, more breath than sound, as she pressed her palm to the foal's trembling shoulder. The snare was tight, biting into flesh. She fumbled for her knife, hands slippery with rain and mud. "Just a second, come on." Regent snorted, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath, the vibration of his anger in her bones. Colby jerked, a fresh streak of blood blooming on his leg. She cut through the wire, yanking it loose, and Colby sagged against her, shuddering. Amelia ran her hands over the foal's leg, pressing a wad of gauze against the bleeding, heart drumming a desperate rhythm. Regent leaned in, nostrils flaring, watching her every move. From the edge of the clearing came the flash of a torch, harsh against the dark. Davies, boots squelching, face set and hard, his radio crackling. "Step away from the animals, Amelia. You're out of line. This is an official operation." Amelia rose, hands stained with blood, standing between the foal and Davies. The air vibrated with challenge, an old rivalry, an ancient test. She squared her shoulders, refusing to yield. Davies's gaze was cold, calculating, already reaching for his own tranquilizer rifle. "You've set snares on trustland," she said, voice low but steady. "That's illegal. You're supposed to protect these animals, not trap them for a headline." Davies advanced, boots churning the muck. "You're endangering everyone with your heroics. This isn't a petting zoo, Lady Hawthorne. Regent is dangerous. The foal is a lure. Step aside." Regent whinnied, the sound splitting the night. Amelia held her ground, the rifle heavy at her side but untouched. For a moment, everything hung in balance. The moor silent but for wind and distant thunder, human and animal locked in a battle older than the stones beneath their feet. Davies made a move for the foal, but Regent lunged between them, massive body blocking his path. Davies stumbled back, mud splattering his uniform. "This isn't over," he spat, spittle bright in the light of his torch. Amelia knelt, scooping Colby into her arms as best she could, cradling the injured leg, guiding the foal away from the tangle of traps. Regent flanked them, neck arched, body humming with tension. She moved quickly, every sense alive, Davies's curses trailing after them. They plunged into the dark, guided only by the faint silver line of the stream and the steady thunder of Regent's hooves. Rain began to fall, soaking her to the bone, masking the scent of blood and fear. She pressed on, feeling every cut and bruise, refusing to stop until the world was nothing but storm and darkness and the shuddering relief of survival. At last, they found a shallow ravine where Regent and Colby could rest. Amelia bound the foal's wound as best she could, whispering reassurance, eyes flicking to the horizon for any sign of pursuit. The storm built above, wild and merciless, a perfect reflection of the battle raging across the moor. She sat with them through the night, drenched, exhausted, heart still racing. Every flash of lightning revealed Regent's black silhouette standing guard. Every roll of thunder echoed the turmoil in her chest. In that moment, Amelia knew the stakes had changed. No more shadows, no more hiding. The fight for the wild had begun in earnest, and she would not back down. The moor was a wild thing beneath the oncoming storm. The air felt charged, heavy with an energy that set nerves on edge and made every living creature restless. Above, clouds massed like war horses, dark and boiling, the scent of salt and rain drifting inland from the sea. Lightning licked the horizon, far off but drawing closer, and each distant rumble made the earth vibrate beneath Amelia's boots. She crouched beneath a twisted hawthorn, jacket zipped to her throat, watching over Regent and Colby in the dim blue light before the downpour. The foal's leg was wrapped as best as she could manage, blood seeping through the gauze, but Colby was alive, pressed close to Regent for warmth and comfort. The stallion's black coat shimmered with sweat and rain, his body tense to bolt at any threat, his eyes never straying far from the vulnerable foal or the woman who'd risked everything to free them both. Wind howled across the open, flattening the heather and bending the ancient trees. It brought with it a sound, at first just the patter of rain on leaves, then the roar of water swelling in the gullies and streams. Amelia's fingers were numb as she checked her pack, her mind running through supplies and emergency procedures. The storm was a living wall now, a gray curtain rolling over the hills, and she knew they would not outrun it. The first drops fell fat and cold, stinging her face, soaking her hair in seconds. Amelia rose, urgency cutting through fatigue. "Come on," she murmured, voice lost to the gale, her hand on Colby's trembling flank. She signaled Regent, who seemed to understand, ears flicking, nostrils flaring, body moving to shield the foal as they edged toward the ravine. Thunder cracked, close enough to shake loose stones from the path. Amelia's boots slipped in the mud as she led the way, eyes straining for the old sheep track that skirted the deeper marshes. She moved fast, heart hammering, pushing through brambles and slick grass. Regent pressed against her side, guiding Colby, the three of them bound by instinct and a silent promise to survive. Rain turned the world to chaos. Water pooled in every hollow, ran in sheets down the slopes, churned brown and wild at the bottom of the ravine. The wind made speech impossible, so Amelia signaled with gestures, pointing, coaxing, eyes wide and fierce. Regent hesitated at the stream's edge, testing the current, nostrils quivering with alarm. Colby balked, hooves skidding in the mud. A sudden violent gust nearly knocked Amelia off her feet. The storm lashed them, blinding and deafening. She grabbed Colby's halter, an old piece of rope knotted in haste, and braced herself as Regent plunged into the water first, head high, muscles rippling with effort. The stallion looked back, whinnied, urging the foal forward. "Now, Colby, now!" Amelia shouted, her voice ripped away by the wind. The foal leaped, splashing into the icy water, legs flailing. For a terrible moment he went under, swept sideways by the raging current. Regent spun, biting at Colby's mane, pulling him upright, refusing to let go. Amelia waded in, boots filling with water, the shock of cold nearly driving her to her knees. She reached for the foal, grabbed the rope, and together, woman and stallion, hauled the young horse free of the current. Water stung her eyes, mud sucked at her legs, but she held on, refusing to surrender to the storm. They scrambled up the far bank, soaked to the skin, every breath a battle. Regent shook himself, spraying rain in a halo around him, then pressed his nose to Colby's neck, reassuring, solid. Amelia fell back on her elbows, gasping, laughing half hysterically at the relief of being alive. The storm raged on, relentless. Lightning tore open the sky, thunder shaking the very ground. The world was reduced to flashes, Regent standing tall against the night, Colby trembling but upright, Amelia fumbling for a tarp to shelter them, her hands shaking. She dragged the makeshift cover into the lee of a boulder, pulled Colby beneath it, pressed her own body against the foal for warmth. Regent hovered close, his huge form blotting out the storm for precious seconds at a time. Time blurred. Minutes, hours, she could not tell. The rain never stopped. Her phone, sealed in a plastic bag, pinged with messages she ignored. Davies's voice, distant, angry, lost in the howl of the wind. Somewhere out there, the syndicate would be waiting, biding their time. But for now, the world was storm, struggle, survival. Amelia forced herself to stay awake, checking Colby's leg, rubbing warmth back into numb muscles, whispering encouragement that neither horse could hear, but both seemed to understand. In the flashes of lightning, she saw Regent's eyes, fierce, determined, never leaving hers. He stood sentinel against the darkness, daring the world to come for what he protected. The storm broke at last with a ragged whimper, dawn bleeding through the clouds in strips of pink and gold. The moor was transformed, sodden and battered, water pooling in new lakes, old paths erased or washed away. Amelia staggered to her feet, bones aching, every muscle screaming with fatigue. Colby rose too, shaky but alive, his wound caked with mud but no longer bleeding. Regent nuzzled the foal, then lifted his head to scan the horizon. Amelia knew the danger wasn't over, not by a long shot, but in that moment, watching the black stallion stand proud and unbowed in the morning light, she felt something hard and fierce ignite in her chest. They had survived the storm, together. As Amelia packed her things, wrung out her clothes, and coaxed Colby to stand, she caught Regent's eye. Something like gratitude passing between them. No words needed, just the battered hush of the moor and the sun rising over a world remade by wind and water. And somewhere, in that silence, a promise. No matter what came next, she would not let them down. Morning arrived on the moor, strange and silent, as if the storm had wrung every sound from the land. The earth was slick with mud and rainwater, puddles glinting in the wan light, air thick with the scent of sodden grass and peat. Amelia moved stiffly, exhaustion woven into every muscle, her jacket heavy with water. Regent and Colby grazed nearby, Colby limping but alive, Regent scanning the horizon with restless energy. For a while, only the rhythm of their breath, the crunch of hooves, the whisper of wind. But even in that fragile peace, Amelia sensed something wrong. The birds were silent. Somewhere on the edge of hearing, an engine rumbled, distant but drawing closer. She froze, every instinct screaming warning. A flicker of movement across the slope, a flash of metal, black against green. Then another and another. 3 Land Rovers, their paintwork glossy, their windows tinted, trundled over the rise and lined up along the old fence line. Men stepped out, boots slick with mud, coats zipped against the cold. Felix Crow walked among them, the infamous leader of the Foxhall Syndicate, tall and fox-faced, his eyes sharp as glass. Amelia ducked low, heart thundering. She counted the men, at least 7, all moving with purpose. They carried nets, tranquilizer guns, and lengths of heavy steel cable. 2 unleashed hounds, their noses low, ears alert. The syndicate hadn't come for a hunt, they'd come for a capture. Regent snorted, muscles bunching, head high. Amelia signaled with her hand, urging the horses to move deeper into the bracken. Regent obeyed, pushing Colby ahead, his own body between the foal and the danger. But the syndicate's men fanned out, cutting off every avenue of escape. Amelia slipped through the tall grass, keeping low, willing herself to disappear. Every step felt louder than thunder. Felix Crow surveyed the moor with clinical detachment, his voice carrying on the wind as he issued commands. The men circled in, nets stretched taut, forming a living trap. One man lifted a tranquilizer rifle, sighting along the barrel. Amelia's pulse hammered. She watched, helpless, as the crosshairs found Regent's broad chest. A shot cracked through the air. Regent reared, shrieked as the dart struck his shoulder. He staggered, pawed the ground, sides heaving with fury. Colby whinnied in panic, circling blindly. Amelia bolted forward, rage and terror propelling her through the grass. "Stay back!" Crow's order rang out, the men tightening their grip. Hounds barked, leaping against their leads. Regent fought the drug, foam flecking his mouth, hooves digging trenches in the mud. Amelia threw herself in front of the nearest vehicle, arms wide, boots planted in the churned earth. She drew a deep breath, forced her voice above the chaos. "This is protected land. You're breaking the law. Hunting Act 2004, Section 8. Illegal pursuit and entrapment of wild horses." Crow smiled, thin and cruel. "You have no authority here, Lady Hawthorne. You're trespassing. Step aside before you get hurt." But Amelia stood firm, her blood pounded in her ears, her body trembling, but she didn't move. The syndicate men advanced, surrounding her, nets poised, dogs straining at the leash. Regent stumbled, the sedative burning through his veins, but his eyes found Amelia's. Wild, pleading, refusing to yield. Then, from the far end of the moor, a new sound rose, a chorus of hooves, the thunder of a herd in full gallop. Moorland mustangs, a dozen or more, led by a scarred mare with a pale blaze down her nose. They swept over the hill, pouring down like a living river. Crow's men hesitated, eyes wide, as the herd thundered toward them, Regent's old companions summoned by the violence in the storm. In the confusion, Regent found a last reserve of strength. He surged upright, shaking his massive head, bellowing a challenge. Colby bolted to his side, the foal's fear swallowed by instinct, by the gravity of the herd. The mustangs crashed through the syndicate's cordon, scattering men, knocking aside nets and guns. Dogs yelped and fled. Crow stumbled back, cursing, as the herd surged around him, their bodies a shield of living muscle and hooves. Amelia darted to Regent's side, grabbing his halter, steadying him as he fought to stay upright. Colby pressed against her, trembling but unhurt. The world blurred into chaos. Men shouting, mustangs whinnying, dogs barking, engines revving, as two of the Land Rovers lurched into retreat. She could feel Regent's heartbeat through the rope, fast and wild, fighting the pull of the drug. She spoke softly, urgently, her hand pressed to his neck, willing him to stay with her. Rain began to fall again, thin and cold, as the last of the syndicate men fled into the mist, leaving Crow standing alone, boots caked with mud, eyes blazing with hate. For a moment it was just Amelia, the horses, and the battered silence of the moor. Regent's legs buckled, but he didn't fall. The herd gathered around, encircling Colby, their bodies closing ranks, the battered black stallion at their heart. Amelia's breath came in sobs, relief and exhaustion crashing over her. Crow spat into the mud, turned, and stalked away, his plans undone. Amelia watched him go, her jaw set, every part of her aching. She knew the battle wasn't over. Men like Crow didn't give up easily. But for now, in the aftermath of chaos, the wild had held its ground. As the herd melted into the mist, Regent at their center, Colby safe at his side, Amelia felt a fierce, aching pride. She pressed her forehead to the stallion's neck, whispering gratitude, sharing his trembling relief. The Moor was wounded, but undefeated, the spirit of the land burning brighter than ever in the wild thunder of hooves and the silence that followed. Above them, the clouds parted, pale sunlight glancing off the wet grass. Amelia raised her head, blinking against the light, heart pounding with hope and fear and fierce determination. She had witnessed the wild resist, refuse, and rise. The fight for freedom was not yet won, but it had found its champions. The world felt cleansed and raw in the aftermath of the storm and the chaos of the chase. Clouds still dragged their shadows across the moor, but the sky was opening, sunlight streaming in sudden golden shafts that painted the battered grass in brilliant color. The moorland herd, shaken and splattered with mud, circled near the crest of the hill, as if guarding their own against whatever else the day might bring. Regent stood among them, regal even as the sedative gnawed at his strength. Colby pressed to his side, ears flicking, eyes wide. Amelia leaned against a slick boulder, knees weak, heart still pounding from the adrenaline crash. For a moment, she just breathed, letting the relief and exhaustion mingle, letting herself believe that, for now, they were safe. The wind had shifted, bringing the smell of trampled earth, wildflowers bruised by hooves, and the tang of distant wood smoke from a farmhouse over the next rise. From below came the crunch of footsteps, heavier and more uncertain than those of the syndicate. She straightened, every muscle alert, fingers tightening around the muddy halter rope. It was Davies, coat torn and splattered, boots caked with peat. Behind him, 2 National Trust Rangers trailed, radios dangling, eyes wide with shock at the evidence of battle. Nets twisted and abandoned, tire tracks ripped through the grass, the herd scattering like phantoms in the morning mist. Davies stopped, chest heaving, face flushed with anger and embarrassment. His voice was brittle, his authority cracked by the reality of what had played out while he'd been left behind, chasing signals and paperwork. "What happened here?" he demanded, looking from Amelia to Regent to the ring of battered horses. She met his gaze, her own voice steady, though her hands trembled. Foxhall Syndicate staged an illegal hunt. They used tranquilizer darts, nets, dogs, on trust land, in violation of the Hunting Act and every rule of common decency. You want a headline, Malcolm? There it is. One of the rangers, barely older than a schoolboy, raised his phone, snapping photos, evidence gathering in a world where the truth sometimes needed proof. Davies hesitated, caught between his sense of command and the tidal force of events that had swept him aside. "Don't try to cover this up," Amelia said quietly, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact. "If you do, every camera and every bystander here will remember. The world's changed, Malcolm. The moor doesn't belong to syndicates and headlines anymore. It belongs to the wild, to all of us." She watched as Davies' anger faded, replaced by something like resignation. In front of the rangers, the legal observers, the glinting phone screens, he took out his notepad, pen shaking, and began to take statements. Amelia signed her own name at the bottom of the incident report, her signature bold, her back unbowed. As the rangers worked, the herd began to move. Regent lifted his head, eyes bright, the effects of the drug ebbing with every heartbeat. He tossed his mane, nickered softly to Colby, and pressed forward into the open moor. One by one, the others followed. The battered mare, the colts, a bay with a torn ear, all coiling around Regent in a loose, living spiral. Colby, emboldened, limped after them, pausing only once to look back at Amelia, as if memorizing her scent, her shape, for some other time and place. The sky brightened, clouds rolling away, the landscape stretching endless and green. Sunbeams caught Regent's black coat, turning it to blue, to silver, to something not quite of this world. As the herd gathered at the crest, silhouetted against the rising sun, it was as if the moor itself was saluting them, a last defiant act of wildness in a world that so often sought to tame it. Amelia watched, arms wrapped tight around herself, as Regent turned one final time. His gaze locked with hers, and in that moment, 1,000 things passed between them. Gratitude, understanding, respect, a promise perhaps that neither would forget what they had fought for, freedom, family, the right to exist on their own terms. Davies called up from behind, his voice quieter now, the edge dulled. "What now, Amelia? You think this changes anything?" She shook her head, a smile flickering on her lips. "I know it does. For them, for us, for the land." She turned, boots squelching, every muscle singing with fatigue, and began the slow walk back toward the edge of the moor. Behind her, the rangers finished their reports, gathered their gear, and watched the wild horses vanish into the haze. There was no victory dance, no fanfare, just the quiet triumph of having stood, for a moment, on the right side of a boundary, older than any fence or deed. As she reached the stone wall that marked the border of Wycliffe land, Amelia paused, looking back one last time. Regent and his herd were now just shapes against the sky, Colby's youthful form darting among them, safe at last in a world that had nearly swallowed him whole. The air felt lighter, the land itself quieter, as if the moor was exhaling. Amelia knew there would be consequences, meetings, investigations, the slow, grinding machinery of change. She was ready. The fight was never just about a single horse, or even a herd. It was about the idea that wildness deserved honor, that freedom deserved protection, that dignity mattered even when the world looked away. She reached for her phone, hands still shaking, and began to draft the first lines of her report. But she paused, fingers hovering, and instead simply stood there, letting the wind wash over her, feeling the steady, unbreakable pulse of the land. In the distance, the herd disappeared into sunlight, shadows merging, boundaries forgotten. And Amelia, daughter of Hawthorne, ranger of the wild, felt for the first time in years entirely, undeniably free. The days after the confrontation on the moor unfurled like a bruise, slow and aching, marked by a peculiar stillness in the land and in Amelia's own chest. The wild horses had vanished back into the folds of heather and stone, as if swallowed by the very soul of North Yorkshire. The rain fell gently now, no longer violent, just a constant, soothing percussion against the window panes and rooftops of Hawthorne Manor. Amelia found herself moving through the halls with unfamiliar lightness, no longer hiding from her family's eyes, no longer bound by the duties that once chafed at her skin. She spent her nights at her desk, lamp burning long past midnight, her notebook and laptop crowded with field notes, sketches, articles, legal printouts, and the first rough drafts of something larger. The events on the moor played in her mind again and again: Regent's furious defiance, Colby's trembling trust, the Mustang's charge, the syndicate's panic, the sick weight of the tranquilizer dart in her hand. Sometimes she pressed her forehead to the cool glass and watched the lights flicker across the grounds, letting the memory of wild hooves on wet grass guide her pen. She wrote with a ferocity that surprised her, wrote until her fingers cramped, wrote until the arguments, the pain, and the hope were all there on the page. "Wildlife is not lawless," she typed, the sentence ringing in her mind, "but its laws are different than ours. We cannot govern by fear what was made to live free. The wild does not ask for permission, it asks for respect." Her resignation letter to the National Trust was short, but her attached essay was not. In it, she laid out everything she had seen, everything she had felt: the failures of containment, the cruelty of bureaucratic solutions, the desperate need for something new. She cited examples from her time on the moor, named names, attached photographs. Evidence, not just emotion. She sent it to Davies, CCCing the head office, and then, after a moment's hesitation, attached it to an email addressed to the Guardian's environmental desk. She slept for 2 hours, then woke to her phone buzzing with notifications. The story was spreading, local news first, then national. Headlines called it "The Battle for the Yorkshire Wilds," ran photos of Regent's silhouette against the sunrise, published her words and sketches, alongside official statements from the Trust, the police, the RSPCA. Journalists called for interviews, lawyers offered advice, strangers sent thank you letters and stories of their own. She was no longer a nameless ranger or just another Hawthorne. Her name was now tied to something bigger: a movement, a question, a call for change. But the work was not over. If anything, it had just begun. Amelia fielded meetings with officials from the National Trust, with members of Parliament, with representatives from wildlife charities and advocacy groups. Some were polite, some skeptical, a few outright hostile. The argument was always the same. What would you do differently? How could the law be changed to protect both people and wild things? What would happen if we let go of the old ways? She carried with her the battered field journal, pages stained and dog-eared, evidence of the moor's quiet wisdom. She spoke of Regent and Colby, not as legends but as teachers. She described the herd's complex society, their ability to self-manage, the failings of forced containment. She argued for a pilot program, a system of semi-wild management where rangers monitored but did not intervene, where the moor became not just a preserve, but a living experiment in coexistence. She found unlikely allies: a parliamentary backbencher, passionate about rural issues; a journalist who'd once grown up riding ponies on the moor; a retired judge, angry at the law's slowness to evolve; and, to her surprise, her own mother, Countess Hawthorne, who attended a public meeting in the village and stood up to say that honor was not inherited but earned through courage and kindness. It was not easy. The Trust's old guard bristled at the idea of change, at the public scrutiny, at the suggestion that for years their practices had been more about appearances than real stewardship. Davies, faced with overwhelming evidence and public pressure, eventually agreed to step aside, though not without a final meeting in which he offered her a quiet, almost grudging respect. "You made it impossible not to listen," he said, handing her a copy of the signed policy proposal. "Let's hope the horses teach us better than we've taught them." Amelia's life became a cycle of town halls, interviews, and walks on the moor. She took time to breathe, to return to the land that had changed her. She found new meaning in the silence, no longer isolation, but connection. Children from the village began to visit, eager to hear stories, to find hoofprints, to glimpse the wild horses as they streaked across the far hills at dusk. And always, Regent remained a mystery and a promise. She saw him rarely, a fleeting black shadow against the skyline, always leading, always teaching. Colby grew stronger, his limp fading, his confidence growing as he learned from the herd. Sometimes, Amelia would spot the foal among the others, wild and uncatchable, and she would smile, knowing that the story was not hers alone to tell. The policy changed slowly, but it changed. Parliament debated, and in the end, passed a pilot program based on her proposal. The moor would be monitored, studied, protected not as a museum, but as a living, breathing wild. Its rules set by nature, its future shaped by those willing to learn rather than control. On the day the news broke, Amelia returned to the ridge where she had first watched Regent in the mist. The wind was gentle, the sky impossibly wide. She set down her pack, let her fingers drift over the wildflowers, and listened for hoofbeats in the distance. Somewhere, a stallion called out, voice ringing across the heather. She closed her eyes, at peace. The world had shifted. She had shifted. And in that quiet, she understood at last. Some values are not written in law or etched in stone, but in the choices we make when no one is watching, on wild ground, beneath an endless sky. The air on the moor was different now, clearer, as if all the battles, storms, and secrets had been swept away by the steady work of time. Summer had crept into Yorkshire, laying gold across the heather, bringing a hush and warmth that settled even the oldest stones. In the early morning, when the world belonged to dew and sunlight, Amelia found herself walking the same path she'd taken so many times before, boots pressing through soft grass, rucksack slung over her shoulder, heart light with hope she'd once thought impossible. It was the first day of a new program, a new beginning. A handful of children gathered at the edge of the moor, chattering excitedly, eyes wide at the wild promise of open land. They were city kids, mostly, nervous at first, their teachers smiling, encouraging them to spread out, to listen, to look. Amelia moved among them with quiet confidence, her hair tied back, her voice gentle but assured, a guide not just through the land, but through something deeper and older. They reached a low rise, sunlight slanting across the fields, the air alive with the hum of bees and the laughter of children running ahead to spot rabbits, beetles, and always the shadow of something larger in the distance. Amelia paused, letting them scatter, remembering how she'd once watched this same horizon, searching for the glimmer of movement that might mean wild horses. Now, those horses were part of the story, not just a rumor, something protected, honored, allowed to shape the land in their own secret ways. She called the group together, her voice soft but carrying in the morning stillness. They sat in the grass, squirming and giggling, but fell quiet as she told them the story. Not just of Regent or Colby, but of what it meant to belong, to protect, to trust in wildness. Her words weren't lectures, but invitations, opening their eyes to the rules of the moor. Respect what you do not control, help when help is needed, and understand that family is a choice as much as a fact. In the distance, a ripple moved through the herd. A stallion broke from the others, coat black as a thundercloud, mane whipping in the wind. Regent. His presence drew every gaze, children and teachers alike transfixed by his strength, his beauty, the dignity that no fence or title could grant or take away. By his side ran Colby, taller now, stride long and sure, the limp gone, his body lean with the health that only freedom can bring. The herd crested the rise, sunlight catching on their backs, wild and whole. For a moment no one spoke. The silence was reverent, filled with awe. Amelia felt it in her bones, the deep, wordless gratitude for what had been saved, for what had endured. Regent paused, lifted his head, and looked directly at her. Across the distance, something passed between them. Recognition, respect, a quiet promise that their story would continue beyond this day. The children erupted in cheers as the herd thundered along the horizon, their shapes dissolving into the morning haze, legend and reality woven together. Amelia watched until they vanished, heart pounding, a fierce smile tugging at her lips. She turned to the children and saw, in their shining eyes, the future she'd hoped for. A new generation, not taught to conquer, but to cherish. The rest of the day slipped by in a gentle rhythm. They explored the moor, charted streams, found wildflowers Amelia had first sketched in her notebook. She told them about the seasons, the migrations, the quiet patience needed to spot a deer or hear a skylark. They learned not just facts, but ways of seeing, of belonging to a place without needing to own it. When the sun stood high, they picnicked in the shadow of a hawthorn, the same old tree where Amelia had once sheltered from rain and doubt. The children asked questions, hungry for stories, about the battle on the moor, about the stallion who would not be tamed, about the foal who learned to run. Amelia answered what she could, letting mystery linger where it belonged. As the afternoon waned, the teachers gathered the group, waving thanks as they made their way back to the village. Amelia lingered, gathering her things slowly, heart heavy with a bittersweet ache. The moor was never the same twice, she knew. Change was its oldest secret, its deepest law. She sat for a while, letting the silence gather, thinking back over every step that had brought her here. The choices, the losses, the moments of fear and wonder. The lesson she'd learned was as clear and unshakable as the sun warming her skin. Family is something you build, not something you inherit. Honor is what you do when the world is watching, but integrity is what you choose when it's not. Freedom for the wild was freedom for herself. She understood now that the greatest acts of courage are quiet. Standing up, staying true, letting go. Back in the village, posters had begun to appear. National Trust events, volunteer days, plans for new research. But it was more than programs or policies. Something in the spirit of the land had shifted. People came to the moor, not just to observe, but to learn, to participate, to care. Her essay was shared, in classrooms, her sketches pinned to notice boards, her voice no longer lost in the wind. The last light of evening stretched across the hills, painting the world in gold. Amelia started for home, feeling the soft weight of contentment settle on her shoulders. She would always belong to this place, but she no longer needed to prove it. She knew, as surely as the sun would rise, that honor, wildness, and love were never about possession. They were about respect, about choice, about standing in the gap when others walk away. As she reached the stile at the edge of the field, she paused one last time. On the distant ridge, silhouetted by fading sun, Regent and Colby stood together, the herd fanned out behind them. The wild horses watched her go, guardians of a freedom that now belonged to them and to the future. Amelia smiled, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. True family is who you choose to protect, not just who shares your blood. True honor is the decision to do right, especially when no one compels you. And England's wild places remain noble because they abide by the oldest code. Give space to the weak, answer for your selfishness, and trust in the power of choice. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Amelia walked home, carrying with her the quiet joy of a world remade, and the certainty that what mattered most would always endure.